Welcome to the Chaos and Light podcast. I am your host, Angela Levesque, and on today's episode, we are talking about consciousness, the brain, and the true nature of reality and manifestation with Hawley Martin. We'll get to that in just a minute. If you haven't checked out chaosandlight.com recently, there are so many tools and resources to support your personal evolution. There's a new article up on warriorship literature, so if you're interested in Carlos Castaneda or even Don Miguel Ruiz, check that out. It's called Freeing Personal Power. I also posted a pretty in-depth article on how we use the chakras as a kind of framework for personal evolution. So if you haven't checked it out, go to chaosandlight.com. I have some cool events coming up, working with your animal guides, conversations in consciousness, as well as the ongoing Living Light gathering. So you can find that at chaosandlight.com/event. Well, we will be back after a ridiculously short break with Hawley Martin. Are you enjoying this podcast and want to help this lady out? Well, share it with friends, or even better, leave a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Now back to the show. Well, as I just mentioned before the break, I am here with Hawley Martin. As a talk show host of a popular weekly internet podcast, The Truth About Life, it became clear to him that he had interviewed dozens of near-death survivors, psychics, paranormal researchers, quantum physicists, and medical doctors, that humankind is on the cusp of a transition to a new understanding on the true nature of reality. To share what he has learned and to help speed the transition, which he believes will result in the rebirth of optimism and the world becoming a better place to live and work, he has written well over a dozen books, many of which have achieved bestseller status on Amazon. So with that, I welcome Hawley Martin to the program. Well, you are a prolific writer. I couldn't believe it when I was checking out your website. How long have you been writing those books? How many books do you have on there, first of all?
I think there are over 24. I've kind of lost track how many. I mean, there are actually some books I've written that aren't even on there because it's just like gets to be too many. But I've been writing now since I started my first book in about 1983. So I've had a little time to do it. Yeah.
Wow, because I couldn't, and there were so many books. I was struggling to figure out, okay, so what is going to be the focus of this conversation? But I had to pick up on the thread of consciousness because it's something that I have been very interested in. I remember, I think it was in the early 2000s, and I used to listen to Coast Radio. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I think I heard Dr. Bruce Lipton on, and he started talking about this idea that our brains were not only transmitters, but they were receivers. And there was actually these receivers on each of the cells that we were connecting to something, some field that was outside of ourselves. And this just kind of blew me like wide open. And I just thought that feels right to me. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. So this is kind of where I want to start our conversation today. You have a book called Consciousness, the Hard Problem Solved. So first of all, can you explain to my listeners what most like neuroscientists and people who study consciousness, what they're talking about when they say the hard problem of consciousness?
Well, they call it the hard problem because they haven't solved it. They don't. They think, most of them, that consciousness is manufactured or created by the brain. But the truth of the matter is it's not. So they're really looking in the wrong place. The truth is that the brain is a receiver of consciousness, which you just mentioned, and it's a receiver that allows us it integrates our consciousness with our body. It really takes part in our consciousness in that it is a receiver. It's like a cell phone would be, but it integrates it with our body. It allows us to operate in this physical reality. I think that an analogy might be it's sort of like our bodies, I think maybe later we're going to talk about Ra and the Law of One, what Ra calls our mind-body complexes are like diving suits that a deep sea diver would use to be able to walk around and do a job in the ocean, deep in the ocean. It's really the only way we can come into this reality is through our mother's womb and into a human body. And there's plenty of evidence that verifies this, or at least supports this idea. And it seems that a lot of neuroscientists just ignore it because they're stuck on the 19th century idea that the only thing that exists in the universe is material substance, which of course is baloney.
What are some of the pieces of evidence that leads you to believe that consciousness is something that exists outside of us?
Well, there's a whole slew of it. I guess the most famous, and the one that probably a lot of people will feel is the most credible, the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and certainly the University of Virginia is one of our top universities. It's number 1 or 2 as far as public universities in the United States are concerned. And their medical school have a department that's been studying this for just about 60 years, since about 1960. A fellow named Ian Stevenson. You're a Canadian, so I'll tell you that Ian Stevenson was a Canadian who was graduated number 1 in his medical class at McGill University, which I guess is your equivalent to Harvard. And he began studying children's memories of past lives. He was a psychiatrist, and he taught at the medical school. And he got a grant from the founder of Xerox, a lot of money, to study this subject. And he did. And since 1960, they still are studying. They still have that same department. And it's fully staffed, and they're still studying this. And they've done more than just study children's memories of past lives. But I will say quickly that in the 60 years since they began, they now have something like 2,700 cases in their files of children who remember past lives, and they've studied them, and that over half of them check out as far as what the child says about who he was in the past life and what he did and so forth. They've been able to actually find an individual that fits that description, and it's pretty convincing that that's really who the child was. The other things that the university has come out with that say our consciousness is not confined to the brain or even created by the brain, but the brain is a receiver, there are 3 things. One is that people on their deathbed who have been in a coma or have had Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, have not been lucid for some period of time. Often, right before they die, they become lucid and they are able to communicate lucidly. And this is a phenomenon that's been, you can find in the medical records going back a couple of 100 years. And if you were to do a survey of people that work in nursing homes and so forth, you would find that it happens pretty frequently. In fact, it happened with my grandmother when she died. She had been in a kind of a coma for months, and about half an hour, 10 minutes before she died, she seemed to come out of it and was able to talk with family members who were there lucidly, and then she passed away. That's one thing. Another one is that many people who have very little brain tissue, for example, people who have the disease of having fluid on the brain, I think it's called hydrocephalus, often have not only just normal intelligence, but above average intelligence, whereas 95% or more of their brain is incapacitated. And so the third thing would be near-death experiences. The fact that people often, when they are being operated on or have an accident or whatever, they're clinically dead. They leave their body. They're able to describe in great detail what's going on around them, so that when they come back, they can, tell the doctor what he was doing and what he said to the nurse and things like that. So those four things are evidence that the University of Virginia puts forth. And of course, there are all kinds of other things too. Studies of ESP back in the 1930s all the way up until the 1960s. J.B. Rime at Duke University conducted experiments that demonstrated that ESP is real. And there are plenty others if you want to get into it.
Well, I have a question. So many of those things, for example, like children remembering previous lifetimes, or loved ones seeing their past family members right before they're ready to transition, I would say that would speak to the idea that there is life after death, that there's this enduring soul. How does that translate for you into this idea that there is consciousness? Or do you think that soul is consciousness?
Well, if someone is clinically dead, one case, for example, a woman named Pam Reynolds, you could probably go on YouTube and put Pam Reynolds' near-death experience in and find a video where she's interviewed. She had 2 aneurysms in her brain. What they did was they drained the blood from her body, packed ice around her so her body didn't decay, and fixed those aneurysms. They had to solve in her skull and so forth, move the brain aside and fix the aneurysms. Well, while that was happening, she popped out of her body, was able to describe what the doctors were doing and what the nurses said and all of that before going through the tunnel into the light and visiting her dead grandmother and other people. Now, if the brain creates consciousness and keeps memories, there's no way that could happen. She was not only clinically dead, she was a cadaver on that operating table. The people who have become lucid right before they die, the theory there, according to the University of Virginia, is that the brain is very integrated with your consciousness. And of course, if you get hit on the head or whatever, it's going to affect your consciousness. But when the brain dies, it turns loose of your consciousness. And that's how that phenomenon is possible, that the person becomes lucid right before they die, because the brain has let go. The brain has died. Past lives. People remember past lives if they certainly were dead for some period of time before they were reborn. How could their memories carry over if it's stored in the brain or in the body in any way? So all those things point to the fact that consciousness, memory, and so forth exists outside the body. And my theory is that, and it's not a new one, it's as old as the Hindu rishis of ancient India, is that consciousness, mind, is the ground of being that everything comes from, and that we're all part of that mind. We each have our own little facet of it, our own memories, our own soul, if you want to call it, our own subconscious mind that we take with us from one life to the next. But it's not connected to the body. We come into a body when we're born, and we come here to learn. That's Earth is a school.
So how would this, and I completely agree with you, how would this idea of what I would call like the primacy of consciousness, that things come from thought into form, or from energy from the formless, the realm of the formless, whether you call that like the field of consciousness or field of pure potentiality, and we call it into existence. How would that for you change how we do science today?
Well, I think if we knew that, if scientists would just take that up as a hypothesis, some really good scientists, we could really learn a whole lot, and we could probably solve a lot of problems. Just think about our medicine today is based on pharmaceuticals. We're taking drugs to fix this and that and the other thing, when actually everything about us comes from our mind. We're sick, all sickness, all illness is at some level psychosomatic. I'm not saying it isn't real, it's absolutely real, but it's our mind, our thoughts that create it. And just think of the progress humankind could make if we got rid of that old 19th century idea that there's nothing in the universe except matter. because it's simply not true. I mean, it's an idea that dates from the 18th century, and Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, who said that if God created it, then that's all there is. There isn't anything spiritual or whether behind the veil. And our people in our history, people like Thomas Jefferson picked up on that idea and they became what are called deists. They subscribe to the great clockmaker theory that God made the universe and wound it up and let it go and no longer is involved in it. And then along comes, the Darwinian idea that that's how evolution happened. It all was a great big accident, one accident after another, which makes no sense when you realize that DNA, for example, one molecule, one cell of DNA is 6 feet long of what looks like computer code that tells the cell how to make and when to make proteins. How could that happen by accident? I mean, come on, we're really way past that 19th century idea, and science needs to realize it and pick up on it and take advantage of it.
Well, I know I've spoken to some materialists in my life, and we've talked about, because obviously some of the things that you're touching on has been shown in quantum mechanics, right? We've seen the particle wave duality, that everything exists as a wave until it's being observed, and then it collapses into a particle. And so this would support the theory of this idea of the primacy of consciousness, and that thought precedes matter. And then they'll say, but wait a second, that doesn't translate to what we see in our more Newtonian physics, right? Like where we can predict the movement of the planets in the sky, and there's certain constants that we know to be true. And it appears to me when I think about the scientific method and the way that we do science now, of course, if that is true, and we're creating hypothesis, and we are the observer, and we are, filled with expectation, even in, double-blind randomized trials, that of course we're going to see the replication of things. And that's like kind of the gold standard of science is it reducible, or is it, can we replicate it? And to me, it's just like, well, until we switch that mindset, until we look at it and think, okay, what if our mind actually does precede matter? Then the whole way that we've set up, our procedures, is going to, it's going to continue to replicate our experience, like their expectation, basically.
Well, you can certainly replicate the double slit experiment. I mean, that is the classic one that people who may not be familiar with it, a long time ago, I think it was in 1803 or something like that, somebody figured out that light is a wave. And they did it by having two razor thin slits, shining a light through them. And when there are two slits, what you get on the screen is a light and dark wave pattern where one wave overlaps the other. If you close the slit, you get a circle on the screen that's just the light coming through one. Well, not so very long ago, some quantum physicist types decided to shoot photons, individual electrons of light through the slits one at a time. And if you just do that one at a time with two slits, you will get the wave pattern. But if the scientist, the researcher, measures which slit each proton went through, you get a scatter pattern on the screen of little dots of where the photons hit. The only way that can be is that the researcher's mind causes that to happen because he knows or thinks he knows that he's going to get that result. So, I mean, I don't understand how scientific materialists explain that. Do you?
No, I don't. I wonder though, in your in your bio, you talk about, the true nature of reality, what we're discussing, and that you think it will lead to a rebirth of optimism. How do you feel that if we were to embrace this understanding, that thought precedes matter, why does that leave you so optimistic?
Well, it's because really when all is said and done, there's only one life. There's one life. There's one mind that is consciousness, that is the ground of being of all that is, and we're all part of it. We're all connected to it, and so that means that we're all one. And yet we go around shooting each other up and getting mad at each other because we have different political ideas and things like that. Seems to me, once we realize we're all one, that's going to kind of go away. I mean, it's what in the law of one is moving into fourth density, into the density where we realize that, where it becomes common knowledge that we all are one. When people have a near-life experience and they go through the tunnel and then they have a past life review, in that past life review, they see what their actions did, how they affected every person that they came in contact with. And so if they did something that made someone happy, they feel the joy that person felt. If they did something that made them sad or angry, they feel the anger and the sadness that person felt. It's because we're all one. And that's what we're learning, or what we're being taught when we have that past life review. And so when that gets through people's heads and it becomes common knowledge, it cannot fail to have a positive effect. At least that's my opinion.
Well, I think that's an excellent segue into the law of one material. I actually have my book. I know there's 5. I only have one of them. So let's, if my listeners don't know, if you could explain what the law of one material is, and then we'll kind of go deeper into that idea of the first, second, third, and fourth density that you just.
All right, sure. Yeah, the law of one it's a series of 5 books, as you mentioned, that were channeled back in the early 1980s. I believe they started in about 1980 by 3 individuals. I'm not going to remember their names right off the top of my head, but Ra was apparently a 6th density being who evolved billions of years ago on the planet Venus. Now, people say, oh, well, Venus doesn't support life. Well, it doesn't now. But according to NASA, in fact, in the last 6 months or so, NASA has come out and said that Venus was hospitable to life a couple of billion years ago, that it had liquid water and an atmosphere and so forth that would have supported life. So it's quite possible that what Ra said about himself, and I say himself because he isn't really a he, she, or it. He was more of a they, a whole society or culture that combined into one being. So Ra, being from the 6th density, came through Carla, I think her name was, who was the channel. And one of the men transcribed everything and edited it and made it into books. And the other guy asked the questions. And there were hundreds of sessions. I think there were 106 sessions in all that they had with Ra. Ra was also said that he visited the Egyptians a couple of thousand years ago, and that he explained to them how to build the pyramids, for example. So there is the god Ra in the Egyptian pantheon. And then there are even pictures of him, hieroglyphics and so forth. So that's kind of what the law of one material is about. And the law of one is that all is one, that everything comes from this ground of being consciousness, the source, what Ra called the one infinite creator, and that the one infinite creator created the universe so that he, she, it could experience himself. Being all that is, there was no other way for him to do that. So we are each little bits fractals or holographs of the one infinite creator, and the one infinite creator is experiencing our reality through us.
And so that to me would fully support our conversation that we just had, that we are, part of this, we are oneness. And then basically we have our own individual experience. And then through that, we call forth the experiences that allows the whole, the oneness to differentiate itself, to have those different experiences and awarenesses, and
to have experiences, awarenesses, and to evolve. The creator, we are evolving, and because we are evolving in all other creation, I mean, we're not the only planet with life on it. The one infinite creator is also evolving, and that's the whole purpose of it all.
Yes, I was first introduced to this work through David Wilcox. He kind of turned me onto it, and when you read it, again, it's that feeling of resonance, that it feels true. I'd like for you to speak, to talk a little bit about the densities, the first, second, third, and then you mentioned us. That's what we're working on right now, is the fourth density.
Yeah, we're moving into it. The 7 densities. The first density is air, water, and matter and fire. Just the base. It's think of a planet with no life on it. That's first density, because matter has awareness. It's not anywhere close to ours, but it is aware. Then the second density is life, plant life, microbiology type life, animals, plants, and all that sort of thing, but just life, not self-aware life. Third density is when life becomes self-aware. And that's where we are and where we have been for the past, I don't know how many thousand years. We are aware of ourselves. We can metaphorically step outside ourselves and think about our own existence, and we can even kind of observe our own thoughts and try to figure out what's it all about, Alfie, and that sort of thing. That's self-awareness. That's where we are. But in self-awareness, in order to have that self-awareness in third density, we had to develop egos and come to think that we were separate from the whole. And that's where we are. We are now, according to Ra, he said that in 30 years from when he dictated this in 1981, I believe, we would pass a milestone and start to enter fourth density. Now, it's interesting that the timing on that, because it sort of coincides with 2012. If you add 30 years to 1981, it would be 2011, but it's almost the same time. And of course, there was a lot of talk about making a transition according to the Mayans in 2012. Well, the fourth density, which will take us about anywhere, according to Ra, from 100 to 700 years to fully become, is when we realize what we've been talking about, that all is one, that we are all one organism, and that it is the density of love. It's where we learn to love one another. As Jesus said, a new commandment I give you, love one another as you have loved me, or as I've loved you, excuse me. Well, fifth density is the wisdom density. That's when we spend time really in developing our technology and our wisdom about what it's all about. Sixth density is when those two things combine. It's the balanced density. It's where Ra came from. It's where the so-called archangels and different religious traditions come from. Seventh density is the beginning of the return. It's when we start to return to the creator. And then you might say there's an eighth density or an eighth octave where it all starts all over again. It's interesting that there are 7 octaves, 7 notes on the scale, 7 colors in the rainbow. 7 has been a sacred number in many traditions, and there's a reason for that.
So I think a lot of the book, the raw material, the Seth books, The Return of the Ancient Force, Barbara Messiniak, she talked about Bringers of the Dawn, and she was channeling the Pleiadians. And so there was a lot of channeled material that came, at the end of the last century. And I'm just like, when is it going to happen? Like, when are we going to get this shit figured out? Because, I read these books, and especially, like I said, many of them are like 40 years old now. And I'm just like, it seems to me that we're getting further away from that. I think that now people science is almost a new religion to them. Follow the science. So you're a science denier. And I don't know, like, I want to have your sense of optimism, and when I read these books, like I said, they resonate and they make so much sense, but we just seem so far away.
Well, I think you're right. I think science has become a religion, and I'm not talking about science, because to me it's not science. Scientific materialism. The 19th century idea that all that exists is matter, is material substance, has become a religion for a lot of people. So it may be that the head honchos of that religion have to die off before we really get anybody who opens their mind and sees what the real situation is. But I've found over the last 10 years that fewer and fewer people will take a stand on scientific materialism. I used to, when I was doing that radio show you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I would get scientific materialists on there, and they would say the dumbest things because, their answer to the question was, well, that's what the science tells us. Oh, really? Well, how about this? And there's no answer to it. Oh, it's an anomaly. So to me, what's happening is the evidence is building up. It's like building up water behind a dam, and eventually the dam is going to break. And I think we're pretty close to that happening now.
Yes, I'm just waiting for full disclosure from the government. And the funny thing is they, we've seen the Pentagon come out and say there's UFOs, and it's already sort of out there, but nobody's paying attention. But I kind of think that that'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back and like opens up these conversations. Once I think that the consensus reality accepts that we're not alone.
Yeah, I saw someone on TV in the last, I don't know, it's been about 2 weeks now. And I can't think of his name, Radcliffe or something like that. He was the head of the whole intelligence community under Donald Trump. And he said that on June 1 or by June 1, the Pentagon or NASA or somebody is going to release a report on UFOs that is going to be really spectacular. And that after that happens, come back and interview me, because I'm going to have a lot I can talk about, but I can't talk about it yet. So that's pretty exciting. We'll see what happens.
I think it's very exciting. Well, I want to touch on one more thing. You have another book about magic and manifestation, and I think it's an interesting little topic to discuss after we've talked about all this other stuff. How would you describe magic?
Well, I think I think my book is called Actual Magic. Actual magic comes from belief. When I started getting into all of this a long time ago, into the spiritual side of things, because I grew up in a family of scientific materialists who subscribed to the idea if you couldn't see it under a microscope, it didn't exist. And so I had a kind of an experience that opened my eyes. It was an out-of-body experience. It wasn't a big deal like a near-death thing, but I saw my body lying on the bed. I was up at the ceiling looking down. And how can that be if I'm up here and my body's down there? It means my brain's down there, and yet I can see myself. So anyway, I joined the Rosicrucian Society. You familiar with the Rosicrucians? And I took all their tests and courses, and I became an adept, which is, kind of high up in there. And one of the basic laws of metaphysics that they teach, and it's absolutely true, is that like attracts like. Like attracts like. You attract into your life whatever your thoughts are, whatever kind of person you are, and that is what the law of attraction or magic is all about. You're not going to attract a Mercedes into your driveway by visualizing it. I don't care how much you visualize it. What you have to do is become what you want to attract, and that will bring it into your life. And that's what that book is about. It's how to become what it is you want to attract. First, you have to really find out what it is you want, what your purpose in life is, what your dharma is, if you want to use that word, which is your special gift that you can use to help others. And once you do, you basically have magic at your fingertips, because you can use that to attract what you need in order to put that dharma to work. And that is actual magic.
Well, yes, because I would describe magic, if you were doing from a ritual or ceremony perspective, that magic is kind of the accumulation of energy, which happens through affinity, like attracting like, for with intent and will. So
I think that's right, but it has to be something that you resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be the Mercedes, in the driveway. That's just not going to work. But if it's something you resonate with, something that really you belong with, it's going to happen. And that's real magic,
Because that's the key, is the magnetizing, the bringing it towards you. It just, if there's no resonance, if it's just a thought, if it's not embodied and believed in, like you said, in resonance, it's like doesn't attract like. It's just something that, it's just a visual. It's not connected or embodied.
There's a great book, really, I recommend it to anyone who's interested in this. It was written in, I think, 1912 by James Allen, I think his name was. And it's called As a Man Thinketh. And of course, the quote from Proverbs is, as a man thinketh, so is he. I guess that's in the King James Version. And it really brings to life the idea that what you think and what you believe is what creates your reality, your environment. And he gives so many examples, and it's really well done. So I recommend that. As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
How would you differentiate between the mind and the brain?
The mind is consciousness and memories, and the brain is a instrument. It's a receiver. The mind, the consciousness is non-physical. The brain is physical. It's an instrument like a cell phone or a TV set or a computer that receives the signals and unscrambles them and integrates them with your body.
All right. I like that. I thought we should just clear that up, because talking about manifestation, it's not just thought, because it's not just like visualizing the Mercedes, as you said. It's something more.
It's a quality. It's of being, I think, that
that's
has
a good way
to come
to put
about. And thoughts. Your mind is non-local. It's everywhere at once. You're in Japan. I'm in Virginia. We're able to talk across this internet, and that's what it's like. It's everywhere at once. The mind. I mean, there's a study I talk about in one of my books, that it was a study done with prayer, where people in the United States were praying for women in Korea who were trying to get pregnant through in vitro fertilization. And the study those that were prayed for, there were control groups, and there were those who were actually prayed for. And those who were prayed for had a 52% pregnancy rate, and those who were not prayed for had only a 25 or 26, half the rate. Well, Korea and United States pretty far away. So it's not like you have to be next door. It's our minds are everywhere at once.
I like that. Well, I think that we are up on our time here. I want to give you an opportunity to share with my listeners where they can learn more about you and find your books.
Yeah. As you said, my name is Stephen Hawley Martin, and my website is where you can go to see all my books. It's a very easy one to remember. It's shmartin.com. S-H as in Hawley, Martin.com. And when you go to that website, you'll see up at the top, there's a menu, and you can see the word books on one of the little squares. Click on that. It'll go right to the page with most of my books, at least a couple of dozen of them. And you can click on any one of the images there, and you'll go to a page on Amazon and be able to probably read the first couple of chapters and find out more information about it. So I hope people will do that. shmartin.com.
Yes. Well, like I said at the beginning, you're a prolific writer. There are so many topics that I have been exploring myself for the last couple of decades. So lots of good ones there.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Yes. Thank you for coming on the program. Do you believe in synchronicity and synergy? That when people share, connect, and collaborate from an authentic space, amazing things can and do happen? Then check out the Chaos and Light community, an online space for spiritual seekers that supports personal growth and gives you a frequent touch point to stay connected to your spiritual core. Join a group, attend a gathering, be inspired by our Muse feed, all in a politics-free, ad-free environment. So dive deep into your spirituality at chaosandlight.com. Connect, inspire, expand. Well, that is the episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, please share it with friends. As you know, I am not using social media, so this is I'm requiring a little bit more of an organic outreach. So if you like it, share it. And please feel free to leave a review on iTunes. I would greatly appreciate that. And I want to thank all the people that have done so thus far. Well, that's it for the show. Take care and seek the mystery.